Let's open the public hearing, uh, in regards to, the solar project, Mark Beauregard's property. And we're here for, an appeal by Luke Savoy, on numerous grounds. We have a forum. Luke, would you like to tell us what you're about?
Yeah, I've been a little bit of a repeat last meeting, but there is procedural issues that I saw with the issuance of this permit. It's when the last time that you guys had a chance to read the letter that I wrote up and everybody else. So basically that, not being able to recite that, but, you know, right down to, the biggest issue is the zoning part of it. We have an industrial proposal being proposed in a residential zone, and, you know, like, never did that, seemed to ever fly anywhere. In town, in courts, it's just not what we do. I'm done, planning board member, I've done it for 7 years. That's not something we would ever approve, and typically it was never, you know, the code officer, you know, there's some confusion in how things need to be done. Like, for instance, Tom's would have always checked with us prior to saying, hey, the code book doesn't quite specify. The code book says nothing about solar. All it talks about is essential services, and as I said in the last meeting, to me that means, you know, electrons flowing in one direction. You know, whether it's a business, whether it's residents, you need to get, you know, they're entitled to services. So I see it that way, and that's the only way I see it, and I think that's generally how, you know, the courts are seeing this as well. So I believe that procedure was wrong. I believe, you know, the town attorney had said, had given the green light for the code officer to write out the permit, but I will argue that town attorney had simply missed a lot of things as well, because I said under no circumstance industrial operation, as I said, just talked about getting it rezoned, that's fine, but that's its own procedure, that's its own vote, town warrant article, whatever it may be, but it's not something you can say, we'll take care of that later. You know, if it was taken care of prior to, we wouldn't probably even be here right now. So, and then, you know, I understand that there could be some issues with FAA and positioning of both of these things. And each year, I was for him to talk about that, because that's more his expertise than mine. But yeah, that's the way I'm seeing that right now. You know, there's other issues as well about, you know, devaluing properties and that stuff. But first and foremost, you can't put industrial operation residential concrete plant was proven that.
Any questions for this one?
Yeah, you keep saying industrial zones, I read all the articles and stuff. I mean, they may have made mention to it being potentially commercial as far as manufacturing, but nowhere there did they say it was strictly industrial zoning. Not in any of the 3 permits we were, I mean, 3 court cases we were given. You know, so you keep saying industrial, I mean, at best you might be able to fight to say it's commercial. But I think industrial is pretty hard in the determination of what we're looking at.
No, the reason why it's industrial is because he's taking raw materials from Sun's Energy and manufacturing a completely different product. It's basically mimicking a solar plant or a power station, literally the same thing. In a lot of ways, you know, you're generating power, you're sending it out on the grid, and that's, you know, they define it as manufacturing. And manufacturing with that definition is certainly industrial. You know,
Sheila, do you have anything to offer?
I can't really say much about it in that regard. On you guys and
Well, I guess the question is, how did you see around the roadblock? I'm sure the light industrial.
well, it was given to me from the town attorney that it wasn't, so I went from there. with next step.
In the process of approving this or going through the approval process, did you consider any?
I didn't see any conditions necessary. They had, addressed any issues that could be on the land and the design that was being for the solar panels and how they're gonna be on the ground. I didn't see much of an issue with, I guess, I don't know how to word it. It's not like they're pouring big concrete pads to put them on, so there wasn't really much stuff to the ground. Those are the types of things I consider.
Kristen, are you with us tonight?
I am. It's quite hard to hear everyone on the panel, so I'm sorry if I've missed anything, but I heard my name.
Okay, what I was curious about is, the definition and pigeonholing is not commercial or industrial or anything of that sort. How is it, that you arrived at the decision that it was an acceptable use in zoning?
Yes, so when we're looking at terms in a zoning ordinance, we look first to see whether it fits specifically under a defined term. And sometimes things will fit under multiple terms, and sometimes, there's one clear answer. In this case, while I think it's 100% clear that when this ordinance was drafted, nobody was thinking about solar, the clear language of that definition of essential service and then utilities of essential services both cover this, because utilities of essential services, for instance, specifically uses the word collection. So collection of electricity, and to the extent these distribute electricity as well, it falls under both of those defined terms. So in my mind, although again, I don't think that it was, specifically in the mind of the people who wrote this, I do think that this solar development falls under the definition of an essential service, which means that the code enforcement officer was the appropriate officer to issue a permit.
Okay. All right, good. Do you see a need for any kind of condition?
For any kind of a condition?
Yes.
I mean, a condition would be used only to make sure that this facility complies with one or more particular approval standards. And so, a condition would only make sense if, as presented, the application doesn't demonstrate 100% that it would meet that standard. So if there's a concern about glare, for instance, and I'm not sure that one was presented, but if there was one, there could be a condition requiring that panels be pointed a certain way or using a certain material. But again, that's just an example. I don't think that was something at play here, but that's where a condition would come in.
Does anyone else have questions? Can you state your name?
Yeah, so Brent Parker, I would argue with the attorney that if you read the court cases, read the cases that they're coming forward now, there's an example, we sent a copy of it, the Supreme Court really clearly ruled that conversion of sunlight into electricity is a manufacturing process, and therefore it is an industrial commercial process. And there are more examples of those rulings.
So my answer to that is, I said that in some cases use will fall under a couple of definitions. In this case, it actually doesn't fall under the definition of industrial in my mind, because our definition of industrial is very specific about making one thing from another. And collecting electricity and distributing it is not an industrial process in the sense that it's making one thing from another. And when the cement plant case was in front of the law court, specifically looking at that definition, they put a lot of focus on the fact that that's a requirement of this definition. So I think, if we were applying that here, it just doesn't meet that test.
Did I lose the call, or is everybody still on here, or?
I can't hear anything from the town of Rangeley, but I can see them talking.
You must have muted yourself.
I've lost
Yeah,
sound as well.
I just sent a message. I'm not sure if they read their chats, but
We're working on it. Hit test mic. Can anyone hear us now?
Yes,
Thank you.
having some difficulty, but I can hear you.
That's the mic that we're gonna have to go with for tonight, so sorry guys, but that's what we have. The other one's not working.
So, yeah, just to address a couple of points real quick. One thing is the standard of review. The board can only under the range of ordinance, can only overturn what Bailey did, what the CEO did, if it's clearly erroneous. It's clearly contrary to the ordinance or to the fact. And so the issue that everyone's talking about, whether this is utilities or essential services, as Attorney Collins said, it's a very broad definition in the ordinance, and it's the board's job to interpret the words in the ordinance. I think Attorney Collins said it, better than I could. I would say that, so the other issue that we've been talking about is this industrial, whether or not this is an industrial use. I mean, I think that's a legal matter. I think it's what the board is tasked to do. I don't think that's in front of the board. The use that the question is, does this
Listen at the town hall. Oops.
And, but just to talk about that, there are many solar ordinances around the state enacting solar ordinances. There's so much solar development going on, and most of those ordinances do allow solar development in residential zones. It's with certain standards being met. So it's not.
What are those standards?
They have to do with, the same standards are in the Rangeley ordinance about um, you know, glare, noise, odor. Some ordinances have visual impact standards. The range ordinance doesn't have that in this case.
We need to correct that.
And, so with, and just the idea of whether this is an industrial use, and the question about conditions, I mean, conditions are imposed where there are going to be impacts that need to be dealt with so that the project will comply with the ordinance standards. And here, you know, the thing about solar is it is visible, you can see it, but there's, you know, no noise, dust, you know, no impacts to wildlife. It's not similar to an industrial facility like a concrete plant or something like that, where you have tremendous amounts of dust, noise, wildlife impacts, etc. So it's, the intensity of the use is totally different. And so I would say, you know, on the long, you know, CEO and town attorney guidelines, and on the facts of, you know, whether this project complies with the standards, there has been, and there aren't any standards that have been identified specifically that haven't been met. So I'll leave it at that. I haven't seen any of the cases or submissions that were made, so I can't really talk about those, but obviously I think in Maine, there hasn't been case law that speaks to this issue in one way or the other.
So to ask this question, how many of your farms actually abut people's property right up to the backyard? How many of your farms do that? Versus those that are set off in this area?
Going through you and not.
Oh, okay, sorry. I apologize. No, that's fine. I apologize.
We just don't want you guys to get.
No, absolutely, no, that's fine.
I'm just trying to deal with the sound issues here. I need to check to see if that mic is turned on, and I just want to get up and interrupt everyone in the middle of the conversation. I apologize. I just want to make sure everybody's able to be heard. Okay. Can you try talking now, Brian, and see if people can hear you?
Yeah, can everybody hear at this point?
Much better.
Sorry, guys, apologize.
Are you finished?
Yeah, I'll ask that question. How many properties, through the chairman, how many properties have you affected by putting them right at the back, or how many have you made stipulations that you've had X number of acres or feet away from abutting properties? So this is a big issue for us in terms of property value.
Would you like me to answer that?
Yeah.
So let me just, I'm an attorney. I don't work for Dirigo Solar. I mean, I do work for Dirigo Solar, but I'm not the developer. So I can't necessarily speak to Dirigo Solar's projects. I mean, I work on several of them, but I also work on solar development projects for a number of other developers around the state. And I can tell you that it depends on, you know, the town, you know, or the location. So in some places, you know, there are huge, you know, hundreds and hundreds of acre solar projects that are on organized areas of the state. They don't abut anyone's house. There are also pretty big projects, you know, tens of acres, you know, 20, 30, 40 acres that are in more populated areas of the state that are right up, you know, that do have neighbors that are residential. So, and it depends on the ordinance of that town, where, you know, how that works out. And I think one thing too is that, you know, Dirigo has, and other developers, but specifically Dirigo, has said, look, we understand that there's some visibility here, we want to work with neighbors make them happy and are willing to plant, vegetative buffers, if that's helpful, if that's something that would help, a neighbor's concerns. So understanding that what we have is a big field, of Mark's property, and that there are other residential, there are houses around it, that if, that would be helpful, that would be something that the DRG would be interested in, or, any other measures that would be, available to both parties.
Through the chair, can I ask Mark a direct question?
Sure.
Mr. Borger, does your house border the project? Are you gonna look out your back door and see the project?
No, our primary residence it does not. Just two things, discussion about the location of the 32 towns in Maine that have solar ordinances, 26 of them allow solar in residential, but, I'm not sure that should be the main focus of this meeting. I think it's administrative appeals, and that the question is, did the code enforcement officer err in her issuing of that permit based on how the town code is written? And property values and things like that, aren't really part of this appeal. And so I think we should focus on the crux of the matter here.
Yeah, and the answer to that, in my opinion, is yes. In our code book, it says, heavy industrial definition of it, and you got me already going over this, but a use engaged in basic processing and manufacturing of materials or products predominantly from extracted or raw materials. The light industrial one, a use engaged in the manufacture predominantly from previously prepared materials or finished products or parts, including processing, fabrication, assembly, treatment, packaging, including storage, sales, and distribution of such products. It's kind of like a combination of the two, right there. They both mention manufacture, so it both lands in the industrial thing, so that was missed. And then I heard a little while ago that our ordinance doesn't really give a whole lot of information on whether it affects views or scenic views, whatever. One of the things that we go through when we're issuing a conditional use permit, it's in 38.6.3 for conditional uses. The size of the proposed use compared with surrounding uses and its impact upon significant uses, however you say that. And that has to be looked at. Does it affect it? The potential generation of noise, dust, or
I think we lost him again.
find all kinds of problems with this going in here, and the fact that you just be completely overridden because, of an essential service thing, which in our book still says nothing about solar. It says utilities are essential services, A, roadside distribution line, B, non-roadside or cross-country distribution lines involving 10 poles or less in a shoreline area, non-roadside or cross-country distribution lines involving 11 or more in the shoreline area. That's all it says. And there's a difference between distribution lines and transmission lines. In my opinion, what Mark's doing is a transmission line. Totally different. Send it the other way. Distribution is going to you. Typically.
If you look on page 3879 of the town code book, it says utilities and essential services, gas, electrical, communication facilities, steam, fuel, and water transmission, collection, supply and distribution systems. Such as systems may include towers, poles, wires, mains, drains, sewers, pipes, conduits, cables, fire, alarm, and police call boxes, traffic signals, hydrants, and similar accessories, and the buildings which are necessary for furnishing such services. So when Bailey looked at that, she looked at it under the utilities and essential services, which is what she approved it at. And right there, on the second line, fifth row over, it says collections. I mean, so if you look at it, and basically what it is, because what we have is the ordinances, which is a playbook, basically, if you're a football team. And you have what you have in the playbook and you have to rule on. So Bailey made a determination on that when she gave a permit. And you're talking, excuse me if I speak wrong, conditional use permitting, which is not the issue here tonight. The issue is whether or not Bailey had the right to say, under that definition in our, and I agree, there's a lot of issues in our zoning. But under that specific paragraph, did she have the right to approve the solar plan or not? I mean, you're talking conditional use, evaluating property, and that, unfortunately, the way our ordinance is written, Bailey skipped that process by issuing the permit that she did. Which, where you'd have your fact finding and all that other stuff in that, but right now she jumped right to it, considering it an essential service. So we need to judge on whether or not that was an essential service or not, and less on the impacts of property value, which I'm not saying aren't affected here. Am I making sense when I say that? I mean, that's what we're here to determine.
Yeah, definitely, but you guys need the zoning board of appeals, and it's zoned wrong. So you can look at that all you want, in my opinion, but at the end of the day, if it doesn't fit, it's a zone, because it's zoned wrong. Everything else is obsolete. Zoning trumps everything, in my opinion. I don't know what you think, but every time I go, for 7 years of life, I've been on the planning board, zoning wins every time.
We don't zone to fit projects, we zone and then we pick projects and see if they'll fit the zone. This board has no power to change zoning. That's not the question before us. The question before us is the use in a residential zone. The zone is fine. There's nothing wrong with the zone. We're just wondering whether or not we can do this in that zone. And the code enforcement officer said yes, and issued a permit under the essential services. Now, having said that, she just said herself, and I heard her, she said the reason she issued the permit is based on a legal opinion. We got a legal opinion there on one side, we got another legal opinion here on the other side. So I put no stock in that legal opinion, either side, because you can fight either side the way, any way you want. You understand what I'm saying? We did this before.
Yeah.
With a concrete plan.
Yeah, we get evidence to say that the legal opinions don't matter, because they've been overturned.
In your letter that you wrote, you said it does appear that the best fit under the table of uses is essential services. That gives you an idea of what's going on. It's the best fit. We can't find it anywhere, it's not in there, but you know what, it fits the best over there. That to me does not make sense. The RZO is lacking in a description of solar farms, wind farms, and the uses and the zones and the uses. It doesn't have that. You made a guess based on a legal opinion. He's giving you another legal opinion. If she's got her legal opinion from him, you'd have been just the other way. So I place no stock in it. You see what I'm saying? It's a 50-50 either way. The only person that's going to decide what's wrong down through this whole thing is when you take it to a judge. That's what's going to happen. My opinion, I'll tell you my opinion right now, is my opinion that she did make a mistake based on faulty information from the lawyer. And the reason I say that is solar farms are coming all over the place. Residential solar is the thing that everybody, you can buy residential solar put on your house. A lot of towns have ordinances which regulate that. So that in a residential area, you can put a few panels on your house. But you can't put 1,000 panels in your backyard. So to me, putting a few panels on your house, and so that's why I say you can't generalize solar farms into one thing or another. Because different uses of solar farms for different things mean different things. Solar panels on your house is for your personal use. Solar farm panels out in the
you know, a whole bunch more panels, that's commercial use. You're doing that to make money. You're doing that more than you are for your own use. And to me, if you're doing that to make money, that's a commercial operation. Now, when this zone ordinance was written, it was not envisioned. Solar farms and wind farms, it was not envisioned. It should have been, but it wasn't. And I think these problems can keep coming until that is taken care of. So either way out of this whole deal, the planning board needs to make recommendations to the town to amend the zoning ordinance to deal with this stuff, one way or the other. Now, just to finish, like I say, I think she made a mistake based on all the information. I think if it was a guy that wanted a few panels on his roof, he would have written a building permit. In the case of this is a large commercial operation. It's gonna cover a lot of acreage. It's gonna affect a lot of neighbors, a lot of people. They at least should have a planning board review. Now, I'm not saying that you can stop it. You probably cannot based under the ordinance, but it should have a review. It should go before the planning board, and concerns from everybody should be checked in. It should have at least go through that review process. This is a major operation, as far as I'm concerned. That's my consent.
Well, just to extend what you said, I want to just touch on what Mark said. This is an administrative appeal, and I thought last week that we could deal with it without having a public hearing. And I went on about it at some length, and afterwards I felt bad that I had a near tirade over the whole thing, but I had originally thought I was going to apologize tonight, but I come full circle and I see it the same way I did last week. And that is, this really didn't need a public hearing, but it's a simple matter. Based on the information that is in the ordinance and in connection with the town attorney, Bailey made a sound decision, the only decision she could have. It was the right decision. Administrative. Is it right for the town of Rangeley? That's a whole other thing that we're not going to deal with. But to extend your conversation about commercial, once you start talking about commercial or downtown commercial, it takes it out of the jurisdiction of the code enforcement office and places it on the zone, on the planning board. So it's a mess.
The planning board,
It's something that needs to get
the planning board is still passing in the residential zone.
as it's written out, yes.
But at least you would give it review.
Yeah, but if it was deemed commercial, then that's what would happen.
But it's not up to this board here.
But essential services aren't deemed commercial under the standards of the ordinances now.
Right. And that's if you deem, I mean, there are arguments on both sides of whether or not wind farms, solar farms are essential services. That's not a given. That's still an argument. So people come in to profess it's this, it's that, it's this, and that. It's not. And once the ordinance says it is, or you get a ruling from a judge.
Right, I think that's what it's.
And it's not coming from this board. We don't have the authority to do that.
I agree. Does anyone, who's with us tonight electronically want to chime in, or are you folks all set?
This is Josh Heatley, 19 Village Wood Drive right there. I was just curious, you know, take away the aesthetics alone, which is enough for me to not want this to be in our neighborhood. But secondly, you know, the amount of rigorous planning involved for site sustainability, environmental concerns, nature displacement, all of those issues. I mean, it seems like there's just a lot on the board here that got skipped in this process. And I just would like somebody to speak on that, I guess.
Well, I think that's what I was just talking about, the process as it's laid out in the ordinance now does not see this as commercial, so it doesn't trigger the Rangeley Planning Board's participation. If it was deemed commercial, that would trigger the Planning Board's participation. And you would have a different review process, right from the start. Different set of standards and a different review process.
So, you know, it's a matter of rewriting the ordinance in the long term. Well, hopefully it's a near term, but maybe long term.
Right.
You came tonight, but you haven't had anything to say. Do you wish to add anything?
No.
Tom O'Brien, I live on Pressure Ridge Road, I'm all for it. I'd rather have the solar farm than a bunch of houses there. Really, I grew up in the city, I know what it's like, and, you know. I've reached out to some of the closest neighbors, I called and spoke with Dawn Drexler. She has no issue with it. David Janney said he was all for it. Pete Kennedy, who lives in the red house, which would be most visible, him and his wife and me think it's the perfect spot. So not everyone that's near it is opposed to it.
Yeah, well, the fact that people who aren't opposed to it don't show up is pretty common.
Just letting you know, the planning board has begun the process of drafting an ordinance for this. And so I don't, you know, it's a little mind blowing to think that, you know, obviously this will end up in court if we don't do something about it here tonight, and I do not expect it to ever fly. But, you know, what sense does it make to, you know, put an operation in somewhere that's industrial, light industrial and residential, and then have the planning board send something out that gets voted on, and that somehow is grandfathered in. You know, and I'm still gonna say that I do believe there was a procedural issue missed here. I don't think there was enough information in that book anywhere whatsoever for that to be bypassed and just rely on the advice of the town attorney. I really don't.
The hardest part I have with those situations, the same thing we ran into with the batch plant. There's rules in place, they're written in the book, and we all agree they lack. They're not to where they need to be. But then something like Mr. Beauregard's solar plant comes forward, and it fits into a niche somewhere in the book, and everybody screams, change the rules. Well, you can't change the rules after you started the game. And that's how I feel about the whole situation. Is that you like you're saying, the planning board's trying to write ordinances and change this, and this. Well, that's great. Did they write it before Mark Beauregard turned his permit in on 6/1? No, so he went by the rules the town gave him and tried to do this project. And then now you want to change the rules to the game after the game's already begun. And we all agree the zoning ordinance, all three of us, we've been over this 100 times. They're not very good.
No, I hear you there. I just defer back to the zoning issue. You can't call it residential, so I just feel like homework wasn't done, and that's where I stand on that. Zoning.
Through the chairman, the rules being changed, or one changed, because none of us knew about this until it was well down the road. A good neighbor, if you're a good neighbor, Mark, you would have come to all of us and said, listen, we're gonna build something. Are you okay with this? Can we find a happy meeting where everybody would be happy? That wasn't done. And I found out by, Mr. Chairman, by just happened to run into Luke 4 weeks ago, and
Are you in a butter?
yes,
Okay.
right, in fact, I looked right into the field, you know, my back door, so I'm gonna have direct visual view of it.
And not that this really comes to play, but what Tommy said, he prefer solar over, a bunch of houses there, you know. That, you know, these solar panels are 12 feet high, people are concerned about their views, they're gonna be vegetatively buffered, they can look right over the tops of them and still see all the mountains, you know. If I put in 49, or if I run to extend the sewer, put in 98 housing units for asylum seekers to help Rangeley's workforce and, you know, give it some ethnic diversity. And all those buildings have solar panels on the roofs, and they're all 2 and 3 stories tall, and, you know, there's not gonna be any view anyway, so I'm easing into retirement here. I'm not gonna continue paying those fields and maintaining them. It's gonna be a different use. You know, I know people hope it would stay that way forever, but it's not. There's gonna be a different use there, and I would think, you know, I felt this helped climate change and a bunch of other things, and wasn't very intrusive, it didn't make any noise. Thurgo Solar's gonna spend $5.2 million, no kids in the seemed like it was a good deal for the town of Rankin. And, but that's neither here nor there. You're trying to decide if Bailey and the town's attorney interpreted the code properly and made the right decision. And I believe they have.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's interesting. So what does Rankin do out of it? Because isn't the power being shipped down to Portland? Isn't that what Durga does? They export the power?
I don't know what they do. They just asked me if I would consider leasing them a parcel of land, and I'm interested in doing that.
I think we're getting to the point where we've had most of the basic information supplied to us, so Keith, you haven't spoken.
I do, yeah, because I sent an email to the town in regards to, the glare and the close proximity of, this land to the airport. You would need to file an FA form 7460, and this is the lawyer, I guess you have to ask them if that's been done yet.
Yeah, I would defer to, Nick, Nazarowski on the Zoom. Nick, if you want to respond to whether or not you've gotten FAA submitted, for FAA approval and received it.
Sure. Can you hear me? Okay. I think I heard the question with regard to the FAA approval process. We did run a glare study, in addition to several, all the required environmental surveys that are required to be put before the Maine Department of Environmental Protection. But specific to the FAA, we've done the glare analysis. They've stated there's no impact, and so that's it. So there's basically no FAA jurisdiction over this, or maybe that's not the right way of phrasing it. They've approved it at its current location.
Who's approved it?
The FAA has deemed our glare analysis, our glare report, complete and not to be an impact to any flight path.
Has anyone seen that report?
The glare report is in the application and the packet there for that.
The glare report is in the application. It's just a report on the glare test that they make. It's not a report on the glare test that Rankin.
It's not, it can't be.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so it's just a generic glare test.
That's the general glare test that they did because there's concerns about pilots and glares. And what they're saying, if you read that report, I read all 30 pages of it, they basically ran some tests to determine whether or not glare from solar arrays or other things on the ground would hamper pilots. And the general results of the test were that no, it wouldn't. Only if it was direct on or 0 to 25 degrees while they were approaching their landing at the right level. And in your situation in Ramsey, chances are you probably not going to get that. But they said it was very minimal. A lot of airports, they said, in there have solar arrays right on the airport.
And I can speak on that. So this particular piece of land that the panels are going on are actually on where we turn downwind from base to Feynman. And these solar panels face in the southwest direction, right? Am I wrong?
No, yes,
They do. That is right in line of sight with where we're our most critical point in making the landing is turn downwind base to Feynman, and that glare.
Right, but when you're on base, once you make your turn, and you're in line with that runway, they're not a problem.
I bet they will be.
I see this email from UP that I'm just reading this. The electric price and post permit, the FAA for review, as they will not approve a solar array within the approach area to the runway.
Yep, within the
What does that mean?
It's this solar array is within the approach area of our
Yeah, what you're saying is they will not approve it.
Yeah, they will probably not approve.
So, but they haven't done that yet.
Because they haven't filed it, because they think they don't.
Who hasn't done it? It's up to
The lawyer, the lawyer, yes. That was my next question, is if they've done it, they have not.
FAA is not limiting oversight over these kinds of things. They have no hazard determinations. And so you can submit information to FAA. They don't issue a permit, they just take the no hazard, your submission, and then either make a no hazard determination, or if say something, in this case, there's a no hazard determination. And I mean,
So have they done that yet?
yes, they've done.
Arranged it, they have? Through what form? How do we find that out?
Well, I don't, you know, that's a good, I was not involved in that process.
Who was?
The developers who were, you know, Jergo Solar.
So can you get a copy of that?
No.
Hi, this is Rick Jones. We received the determination of no hazard to air navigation actually today. We just received it from the FAA, so we do have that in hand.
That's obviously something that we can.
And what is it saying?
I can't hear you.
He asked what it said, sir. I didn't say that. No, that's what we have, yeah.
Rick,
Yes,
can you tell us what the determination said from the FAA?
it is a determination of no hazard, and they have their conclusion. Let me see here.
If this is something that Rick Jones is working so I can actually have it in front of you, I can set out to do that.
It says this study revealed that the structure does not exceed the obstruction standards and would not be a hazard to air navigation provided the following conditions, and they have a number of conditions that we are in compliance with.
That was just for height, not for width. Have them read that again.
Well, they consider glare, and these panels they absorb the light more than there is a reflection. The newer panels are much more absorbent than what was on the market 10 years or so ago. So these panels are not considered. In fact, these are the types of panels that are actually putting at airports. Sanford Airport has 200 or 300 acres of these right along the runways.
Right. I'll follow up with what Rick said in terms of airports. We also put one next to the Oxford airport. We're working on putting one next to the Freiburg airport as well. And I apologize, one more. So the Auburn airport, we are located next door to that as well.
Okay. If no one else has anything else to add, I'd like to close the public hearing.
I had a couple questions.
Who does?
Chris Farmer.
Okay. Go ahead, Chris. Go ahead, Chris.
There seems to be, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I had a couple questions in relation to, you know, obviously there seems to be some concern with the abutters to this here. It seems procedurally that the code speaks to the question. So to avoid getting in another situation like we dealt with a couple years ago, wouldn't it behoove if those that the abutters that are concerned could raise their 4 or 5 issues, and if the developer was amenable to addressing some of those via vegetative buffers and all those pieces, which I understand they may be based on what they've sent tonight, couldn't that be dealt with rather than this turning into a 2 or 3 year go to the law court, deal with these things? Because let's face it, the only ones that are going to make money on that's the attorneys, and it's going to drag out. So I just think that it might make sense procedurally to have some discussion of some conditions. Obviously, the FAA thing, it sounds like that's been addressed, but I understand Keith's concern with the approach piece. But to me, the question can also arise if 75 units are built there with metal roofs in that fields, you may have the same challenges there, but even less control of the process. To try to come up with that, a couple $100,000 gets dumped from both sides into attorneys.
That was my comments. Okay. All right, so, is there something you want?
I just want to say, I think that's for them to work, on the others and the developer to work among themselves and doesn't really have anything to do with your verse.
So I would like to close the public hearing. We're gonna take this up again in the regular meeting anyway, so this is just the public hearing portion. I'll make a motion that we close the public hearing. Okay, all in favor? All right, good. Let's call the regular meeting to order. Review the minutes from the last meeting.
A lot of paperwork.
I know.
I have paperwork, I just give it to you.
The only thing I saw was just a spelling error. It said Mr. St. Louis motion to set a hearing, I had said motion to set a hearing for this date. It says C.
Okay, I will correct that.
Make a motion, we accept the minutes as corrected.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Good. There is a slew of correspondence, and unless someone really wants to push it, I don't plan on reading it. So, it's part of the packet. So why don't we go right to old business? Motion to approve or deny the administrative appeal application for residential zone 12 acre solar farm. So this portion of the meeting would be, as far as I'm concerned, input from people would be people who have standing, either you're involved in the project, you're a landowner, or you're within 500 feet or the bus, or input during this portion of the meeting. I wonder if we can shorten this up based on the input that we've gotten. As we all know, this is an administrative appeal. We're here, as we were last week, to decide whether the code enforcement officer acted as she should have. And I'll throw this out there that as far as I'm concerned, there is some problems with the zoning ordinance that as we all recognize. There always is, there always will be. It's never going to be perfect. If we manage to achieve that, we'll be the only town in the world in front. And I talked a little bit earlier about conditions, which other people have brought up tonight. And conditions are a standard part of mitigating concerns of abutters and people with standing. Lots of times things can be done or met that can put the situation into a different light so that people are more accepting of it. And I'm just wondering if, I would doubt that we could achieve that tonight, but I think if the two parties got together in connection with the code enforcement officer, we probably could have a decent chance at mitigating some of the factors. Some of the things that I thought of and Mark presented tonight is solar arrays at 12 feet high. If you put in subdivision, 40 houses, all the roofs being at the limits of town construction, 35, 38 feet, whatever it is currently. There's gonna be a lot more visual impact than what a 12-foot set of structure. Just let me work through this, okay? And, the only other thing I have 21 years experience on the planning board. And something that we always used to put on as a condition was really actually pretty simple. And I don't think I've seen it lately, is that this project needs to meet, it's just a simple line in the condition portion of the approval on the application. It just says, must meet all state and federal regulations. In my mind, that releases the town from having to decide those things. Those are things that the proper authorities will decide. Excuse me, I don't have all that help. I got a mask now. So those are the things I think about in relation to this. Since we've had our last meeting, I went home and spent probably an hour and a half reviewing everything. I was sleeping. But I'd like to see what you have for comments and what Ryan has for comments. And see if we can take it from there.
Like I said, I gave you my opinion, I think it's part of the figures, and, I mean, I'm not against the project, not should have it there, but I think it needs to have a planning board review. And if the planning board means that, the project is good to go, and they put in some conditions, and, everybody's agreeable to that, then that works for me, but I don't believe it should go through on just the,
Okay. Well, I don't know how you can do that for events. It's not why. Well, the way it is right now, you can't. Someone's gonna have to be, everyone will have to be agreeable to the terminology of either being commercial or industrial. For it to go to the planning.
not necessarily the code enforcement officer made the decision one way, she can make the decision another way.
It doesn't follow the ordinance, though. That,
Who means it doesn't follow the order?
it says right in there for essential services, the deciding factor is the code enforcement.
A solar farm is not described as an essential service, it's not in there.
Okay.
That's an opinion, that's what I'm telling you.
Okay.
It's the same thing with deciding about aggregate rocks and stuff like that, the last one we lost in the court. Remember that one? This is the same thing. We're just doing it over again, at a time stop. That's my opinion, you guys can do what you like. But this is a big project, it's gonna affect a lot of people, and it shouldn't have more than just a CEO permit.
To get to that point, a court would have to,
Not necessarily.
because it's not part of the structure of the ordinance.
What do you mean it's not part of the structure?
We're going back to this grid. This grid here tells you who has the determining ability.
Right, I saw that.
Okay, so a court, are we gonna decide as a board that this is commercial or is industrial? Then who's gonna decide that?
The code enforcement officer.
Which you did. Well, she made a determination based on input from the town attorney.
Unless I would like to vote to have her review it again.
Okay, you can do that. Absolutely.
And maybe she'll come to a different determination. By getting more than one opinion.
Can I ask why, the town, was MMA involved in this process at all?
I'm unsure, the original opinion from the town attorney went to my predecessor, and I just cleared that opinion with her after I first looked at the permit application.
Okay, well, what I'm asking is, or what I'd like to ask is, the town of Rangeley participates, or for lack of better terminology, subscribes to MMA as a participating town. So why wouldn't that be the first source, since we've already paid for it, why wouldn't that be the first source of opinion before we went to the town attorney?
I'm unsure, but the decision to go to the town attorney was before it was in the condition.
You see what I'm saying is that if the lawyer had told her, oh my God, that's a pretty big operation, you need to have a review, what would she have done? She has sent it to the planning board.
Because of what it was termed, it would have been termed.
No, because of what the lawyer told her to do. What if the lawyer gave her information, she would have said that needs to have planning board review. I mean, what I'm saying is that she could have got that other information. We've got two lawyers, one here and one here, that tell us both the same, different things, so, you know, you can't say that what the lawyer's telling you is gospel, because it's not.
Can I just clarify, the two lawyers are saying the same thing? He's saying the town attorney?
No, I'm just saying generally lawyers.
Well, he's saying two different lawyers on different sides.
Oh, I see. Right, but earlier, I think you had said that we were, but that's not fair.
You see what I'm saying? Because we're basing everything here on that determination.
We're not approving it.
And the ordinance doesn't really say anything about solar farms, so it's an opinion that the solar farm should fit in this swamp. It's not written in the ordinance, it's an opinion.
Right. And that path was chosen because they determined that it was not commercial.
Who's that?
The town attorney and code enforcement officer.
The predecessor there. He started this process.
Yeah.
He got to a place where he couldn't figure out where it went. So he went to the next step, which is legal advice. And the legal advice told him, yes, this is what it is. He left interim this permit and Bailey approved it under what he had for information. But he couldn't find a place in the zoning where it told him no. He couldn't find a place in the zoning that told him yes. His best fit here, the lawyer said, I agree. This is how we as a representation for Rangeley interpret such and such. And Bailey approved it on that aspect.
Right, and that's where you get into a slippery slope for the applicant, because the applicant makes the application under the current standards of the zoning ordinance. If you start rewriting the ordinances. Well, I'm just saying, I'm throwing this out here, I'm not picking on you. I'm just saying, it's been talked about at the meeting tonight. It's not fair to the applicant, because they submitted an application based on the current zoning ordinance.
But it's also not fair to the butters that feel that the ordinance, is letting them down.
Right, and that's where the legal process.
Exactly.
Yeah. So through the legal process, a judge may determine that it was right from the start, and this can proceed with or without conditions. Or a judge is probably gonna decide that it does not fit, and it's somehow commercial or light industrial, at which point it would be directed back to the town. And if one of those two conditions is met, commercial or light industrial, then it would become a planning board issue. And not a CEO issue. So, now that we've talked this through, at least some, I would suggest that we turn it back to the code enforcement officer to review it and to review it with the town attorney. Since she's already involved in it.
What about the MMA? What about a different opinion?
Yeah, and get an opinion from MMA too. And, see where it goes from there. If in the workings of that process, the two parties can talk about conditions and speak realistically and work their way through it without legal counsel, great. If it comes back to us again, which it might, then it's gonna go through the legal process. What's that?
We're talking about coming up with conditions, potential conditions. There's only, right, one way to do that. It's not for us to go sit in the back room and like come up with this. You have to run it through the planning board. That's the only way.
If there was a determination of being commercial or light industrial, it can't go to the planning board. If you follow this here.
Well, that's why I said you all court stuff that determination is set in, so I don't know, it's just still my opinion.
Chris, are you still with us? Krista,
I am.
did you hear the conversation we've been having?
Probably as well as anybody else on the call, which is not great. So if you could recap exactly what you're talking about.
There's been some concern voiced about sending this back and having the planning board review it. And what I've been saying is, until there's a determination that it's either commercial or light industrial or industrial of some sort, it does not trigger planning board review. It's in the hands of the code enforcement officer until there's a change.
Right. So the code enforcement officer is in charge of making the determination whether something goes to the planning board or not. And in this case, the determination was that it doesn't go to the planning board because it's an essential service. An essential service in this district gets approved by the code enforcement officer. So any remand to the planning board would be inappropriate as far as I'm concerned.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. Do you have a suggestion for us at this point?
Well, your options are, number one, to find that the code enforcement officer acted appropriately in classifying the application as one for an essential service. And, you know, that's step one. And then to the extent the appellant here has challenged any of the determinations that she made in that process about glare or anything else, you'd address those separately. So, you know, I think your first vote is on a motion to find whether the code enforcement officer acted appropriately in classifying this as essential service and finding that she had jurisdiction to issue the permit.
Okay. And since we don't have a board of 5, we have a board of 3. If we have 2 votes for and 1 vote against that motion, then the motion wouldn't carry.
Right.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add? I make a motion that we in consideration of the administrative appeal, find that the code enforcement officer acted within her rights to do this project based on legal input from our town attorney that met the conditions for review.
I just want to clarify what you said.
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
Okay, hold on, let me finish writing. I'm gonna take this, I apologize. In consideration of the administrative appeal, it is determined that the code enforcement officer acted within her rights based on legal input from the town attorney.
I think there was something else after that. That it met the, something like it met the standards of the ordinance. Okay.
You make a motion to approve the
Anyone want to second it?
I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor? Okay. So the motion doesn't get, opposed. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I assume that. Okay. So what would you like to do, Dennis?
My whole concern is that I don't think this is essential service. It's not needed. They don't need to be out of the grid. There's plenty of people out there, but it is a commercial business. They're in this to make money, and not just for one house or 2 houses or for something personal. This is a commercial operation. And therefore, I feel that the code enforcement officer is a designated commercial operation and thus trigger planning board review. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not gonna go through, and it can't still go on its property, but it does set in motion a bunch of events which will bring the stakeholders together and pretty much get them to work on the issues that they have concern with, and then maybe this thing can get resolved. And so my motion would be is that we, move that, the code enforcement officer did make an error in the determination. And we'd like her to revisit that. You want to start with that one?
I just want to hear, Kristen explain that again. Dennis is saying to deny it and send it back to the code enforcement officer for reapproval. Is that what she said? I think she said that was not, I don't know. Kristen, you still there?
Yes, if you're denying the appeal, it's essentially status quo. So the permit stands, you don't need to send it back to anyone.
Well, we can direct the code enforcement officer to do something, can we?
Well, the code enforcement officer has already issued the permit. So if you're finding that there's no basis to overturn that decision, then that permit stands.
What if we ask her to reconsider?
Well, you can't ask her to reconsider. Reconsideration is purely for the person who had the authority to issue the permit in the first place. So if she felt independently that she missed something or made a mistake, she could determine that she wants to reconsider. Now, if you as a board, based on this appeal, have found that she made a mistake, then you could direct her to, you know, change what she issued. So for instance, if you found that she should have conditioned her approval on receipt of the FAA approval, then you could send it back to her with a direction to, you know, review and issue the permit, reissue the permit based on the FAA approval. So I don't know, I guess the question would be, what would you be asking her to reconsider?
What did you just vote on? Didn't you just vote that she made the correct decision? It was, we didn't have a form, we didn't have, we have to vote unanimously because the quorum is 3 and you have to have 3 out of 5 members voting on the positive to make it a affirmative vote. The full board for the zoning board of appeals and for the planning board is 5 members. You can have alternates, we're not even close to that. So, because we're a board of 3, based on board of 5, all 3 have to vote the same for the vote to count. That's how I thought it worked, but, the town attorney, last year with the board of selectmen, they were voting on doing business with the bank, and someone was absent and someone recused themselves, and there were only 3, and there was a vote 2-1, and the town got a legal opinion from MAA saying that vote stood.
So your ordinance, the land use ordinance actually, or the zoning ordinance actually addresses that spot on. It says the concurring vote of a majority of the members of the board present and voting shall be necessary to take action. So you've got 3 people present and voting. If 2 people agree with the motion, then the motion passes.
I just asked you that question.
Yeah, and I agreed that that was the right interpretation.
And that's what I tell you about lawyers.
Well, keeping in mind that I can hear 1 of every 4 words that are said, so I'm sorry if I misheard, but.
Okay, well, what I asked you was, if we're supposed to have 5 meetings, there's only 3 members here, and I, at that point in time, thought that it was gonna be a 2-1 vote. I asked you if that vote carried, and you told us yes.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying now too. So you had a motion to find that the code enforcement officer acted appropriately in finding that she could issue the permit, and 2 people voted in favor of that, right? So 2 out of 3 voted essentially to deny the appeal on that basis. And so that motion would carry.
Okay, well, then, I guess it's a done deal. So basically what you've done is you've got the status quo, the permit exists. There's no guarantee that the parties are gonna even get together and talk, they don't have to. The person can just go ahead and snap the budget. Well, we'll see.
Not that it just matters to the board, but the developers have reached out to Mr. Suarez in the last 2 weeks, I think, tried to start.
They don't reach out to me or anybody else I know.
Either way, I hope we all agree that in the future, solar farms and wind farms need planning board review.
Only if it's a run, you need commercial or.
No, I'm talking about changing so it does, don't you?
Oh,
think?
yeah.
A commercial operation that big needs that.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't,
that's what needs to be changed.
I don't disagree.
We're not here to debate the zoning ordinance, that's the key.
Until the ordinance changes.
Well, that's what we need to be active to get the ordinance changed.
I agree.
And we can do that very simply, code enforcement, all you gotta do is contact the planning board and say, or the selectmen, say, give us some amendments that would deal with these wind farms and solar farms, vent plants, and other things that we have trouble with.
Oh, the ordinance committee is supposed to be a subcommittee of the planning board.
Good luck with them.
Sorry to interrupt, but I do just want to from the board to sign the findings of that at the town office. Just to make a motion to sign the finding of that, that's right here. I just need you guys to make a motion. Once I fill it out, I just have to take off the finding of that, and then I just need a motion. You guys can sign it at the town office.
Oh, okay. All right. And you like the finding?
Yes, I will take it up, and I will
Okay.
tomorrow.
All right, so, we would make a motion that, the approval that we made tonight, motion approval we made tonight for sustaining Bailey's decision, would be accompanied by findings.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Is that good?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So what are the next steps here? Did they just go ahead and do this now? Or do we have
The
to-
next step would, apparently would be, unless you can get together really quick and talk to them, before we start doing something.
Or move by the lawyer?
Taking it before.
Okay. Very good. That's what we'll do.
Get a motion to end the meeting.
I'll motion to end the meeting.
All in favor? Okay.